Hello and good morning. This is Julie with Book of Hours. It is currently 11 o'clock in the morning Central Time. And what I thought I would do today was do a special audio broadcast of the fourth anniversary of the national emergency that was declared on March 13th of 2020. Um, so what I want to do is make sure that all um, all platforms and pages are streaming, and that everybody can see and hear. There's no visual today. There's just an audio broadcast, and I may share a screen or two. I haven't decided yet. But what I thought we could do is just, kind of go over, what we've learned over the last, over the last 4 years and sort of where we are as a society, as people, given the fact that under the status of national emergency, um, it changes the way money is allocated. It changes the way, the way we operate. There's more people working remotely now in the professional sector than there were prior to the announcement of the national emergency in 2020, 4 years ago. So a lot of people have changed their lifestyle. A lot of people have changed their outlook on life. Um, so we'll kind of go over all of that. This is a very casual conversation. I'm not going to be showing you graphs and charts and data and statistics and all that silly stuff. That's other people. That's what they do. I like to talk about the human element and how this has affected everybody psychologically and emotionally. And I also like to give um, my own personal anecdotal stories, which for me personally, what I see with my own two eyes and what I witness with my own two eyes is enough evidence to show that, something isn't right in the world. I don't need, uh, you know, volumes of data sets and graphs and charts and all this stuff. If I see something happening that isn't right in front of me, if I see it, then I know that there's something wrong. So before we talk about, or before I go on to talk about, how the world has changed and how we've all sort of assimilated into this, new way of thinking since the national emergency was declared 4 years ago, I want to talk about a piece that I wrote yesterday. And it sort of ties into this, sort of 4 year anniversary, but I'm just going to read it. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to share the screen so that you can see the blog. So this is my blog, Book of Hours, and then if you go to the tab up at the top where it says Blog of Hours is where you'll find all of my writing. And it's nice to see everybody. Thank you for all the great comments. It's great to know that the audios are working and that you can see the screen and everything. So that's good. What I want to do is I want to read this. This is literally only like a 3 or 4 minute read. It is not that long, but I can almost guarantee you that I'm going places that no one else is, and it's not exciting, and it's not hair raising, and it's not hysteria making. It's just some really simple propaganda pieces that I noticed, and I sort of put the puzzle together on my own and came to a conclusion, which I'm allowed to do. I recently shared this article with some people, and individuals who know a lot about the royal family and have a lot to say about the royal family, and who believe the royal family are like these sort of like baby eating Luciferian types and have like spirit cooking and all this crazy stuff. They read my piece and they said that It was misinformation or conspiratorial. And I was like, wait, but you believe in like the whole baby eating Luciferian narrative. So I thought that that was kind of funny that this individual would say that about this piece, which has none of that in it because I don't really believe in that. So I'm just going to go ahead and read the piece. Like I said, it's only about 3 or 4 minutes. It's not very long. So we'll whip through it and then we'll continue to talk about what our life is like with the national emergency being declared 4 years ago. All right. So here we go. Yet another opinion about Kate Middleton. And this is an AI image of her. This is not a real painting or anything. This is something that AI created. I don't follow the royals. I could care less about any of their drama, and I didn't really have a reaction when Queen Elizabeth died. The only time I took the slightest interest in the royal family was when Netflix released The Crown. I was engaged in the timeline, amused by the inner squabbles and dramatic scenes. The music was always perfectly timed. The intro was creatively fashioned, and I was fascinated with the way the royal family was portrayed. It was entertaining, and I was entertained by its fiction rather than repeat the same tired conspiratorial talking points that every TikTok and Twitter account has spread across the social media feeds, some even bleeding into mainstream media. I'll just cut to the chase. I am one of those people, and there's not very many of us, that strongly speculate Kate Middleton is no longer alive. Although I don't know the royal family personally and I am not a public relations professional, I do know psychopaths when I see them, and I do know that oftentimes PR is used to soften their edges, especially when they are famous. Was Kate Middleton aware that over the years, while she was dutifully keeping her busy calendar of royal duties, that she was being dressed in and thus photographed wearing the exact clothes that Princess Diana wore? Did her wardrobe consultants ever bother to make this known to her? If they had, would she have agreed to it? I'd like to think she would not have agreed to it. Was she aware of the December 18th, 2023 Marie Claire article that compared her to Princess Diana, even down to her fierce independence? Did the royal family set all this up to give commoners the impression that she was attempting to embody the style and demeanor of a most beloved princess who died at the tender age of 36 in 1997? If so, what was their reason for doing so? They must have known that comparing Kate to Diana would only endear her to the public. We all know she's been missing since Christmas Day 2023, which makes the timing of the Marie Claire article, where she is practically designated as the ghost of Diana herself in every sentence, suspicious and off-putting. I don't believe she went in for abdominal surgery. Like I said, I'm no PR expert, but I do know that abdominal surgery is sometimes code for tummy tuck or abortion or even a hysterectomy in famous people speak. But on Christmas Day, she looked independent, healthy, and happy. Planned abdominal surgery just doesn't fit the December 18th, 2023 Marie Claire article, nor the image of her on Christmas Day a week later. A Spanish publication, Concha Calleja, announced she was in a coma. After the requisite public swipe by the palace denying such outlandish allegations, they doubled down. And we all know it was the palace PR team that hastily posted an obviously doctored photo of her with her children on UK Mother's Day. When the Associated Press and all the American press affiliates killed the photo, literally memory holing it into oblivion, it was probably the first time in royal history that the American press stood up to the royal family. We're not pandering to your bullshit. Something stinks in your house, and we're not covering this story. You're on your own. Since then, another obviously doctored photo has emerged. But The very first photo that emerged of Kate was when she was leaving a private clinic sometime at the end of January with her mother. In the photo, she is wearing sunglasses. Her face looks much rounder than normal, and others have noted upon closer inspection that she's missing her signature birthmark on her upper lip. In 2014, a story about a UK woman emerged. She was leaving her professional career to become a full-time Kate Middleton lookalike. Ironically, she holds the same last name as Kate's mother-in-law, Spencer. The story of Christina Spencer, the Kate Middleton lookalike, doesn't end there. In 2017, Business Insider floated another story that an American woman, Heidi again, is also a dead ringer for Kate. And in 2022, People covered a story about an Australian woman that could also pass for Kate Middleton. There are two thoughts regarding these lookalikes. The first is that one of them must have been placed in the car when allegedly Kate is seen leaving the clinic at the end of January this year. The second thought is that from this point forward, any photos or videos we see of Kate making public appearances will probably be one of these three lookalikes. But the most important aspect of floating the Kate Middleton lookalike stories out to the consciousness of readers and viewers of media is that she's nothing special. She's an ordinary middle-class white woman who could easily be replaced. This idea is supported by today's piece from the New York Times. And if you can open it, then you can read the title. The title says it all, doesn't it? She's not even allowed to have her own story about her own disappearance or her own life. Her entire being, her memory, and who she was is being swallowed up by something else. The public has been on overdrive, speculating the timelines, rehashing some sort of PR war between Markle and Middleton, running down talking points about doctored images and AI and other irrelevant distractions to keep people from focusing on the fact that a story about the 42-year-old Middleton standing out on her own was published 1 week before her disappearance. In this Marie Claire article, it shows her wearing more civilian, understated clothing and looking less like a royal. Perhaps the royal family PR psychopaths or the royal family psychopaths themselves felt threatened by this. We're also told a story that Middleton is possibly at Windsor Castle recovering. One thing about psychopaths and royals, they're not very creative. Apparently, a car smashed into the side of the castle yesterday morning, injuring 5 passengers. And I'll bet you Diana Sapphire's earrings that Kate wore on the last day she was seen alive, that we will be told that she was one of the passengers. They've now closed all roads to Windsor Castle. And I don't write this in the piece here, but 2 helicopters were deployed to lift out some of the injured people. Look, I don't want to be right about this, and I'd love to be added to the pile of conspiracy theories for this one. But I have a feeling you all are going to be strung along for as long as they possibly can until the woman herself disappears down your memory holes. Let's just see how it plays out. Okay, so that was my piece on Kate Middleton. And, some people might disagree with me. People really want to hold on to the idea that she is still alive. And I guess what we'll do is we'll segue that comment, that people want to hold on to this idea that someone is still alive. We'll segue that into this sort of like 4-year anniversary broadcast for the deployment of the national emergency. It was 6 days later that the state of California announced lockdown. And then from that point on, it was a domino effect for the rest of the country, wasn't it? But we can thank the state of California for starting this nonsense and locking people in their own homes, which was one of the worst things that we could have ever done. One of the things that, we started out saying at the beginning of this entire operation is that one, it's a military operation. We've never ever stopped believing that, announcing it, supporting that, that idea. Did we have the receipts? Did we have the proof? No. I write poetry and JP is a designer. We don't do that kind of stuff. There are other people that can do all the research into the, how this is a military operation. There are other people out there that have backgrounds, where they have to collect data for their jobs and things like that. That's not what we do. Okay. We just tell you the way the world works through what we see and through what we know. And what we saw and what we know is that it was a military operation. We also said, and we lost patrons, we lost support, we lost friends, we lost, the lovey-dovey community online, all of this. We said that it was never a virus, but more a poisoning. And it was a deployed strategic poisoning where they could actually calculate and control how that poison was sent out to the general population. And so we made the conclusion, the very astute conclusion, putting on our thinking caps and using critical thinking, that it was probably done through flu shots. And this, basically just lost us, before we even started. We lost a huge, we lost a bunch of followers. And we were then, for the last 4 years, we've been squelched, silenced, censored, taken down, attacked. Um, you know, I'm surprised, someone hasn't tried to like mess with our car. You know what I'm saying? Like, we have just been attacked right and left for this position that we took, which is that it was a military operation and that it's not a virus, it's not a pandemic, it's not a novel coronavirus, that there were actually people that were stumbling into hospital emergency rooms or calling 911 because they were having real life reactions to something, and some people actually did die. And that was done as a result, in our opinion, of a mass poisoning. And the poisoning was probably deployed through flu shots, not through the air. I know somebody by the name of JJ Cooey, who we don't follow. I've never seen a video of his. Well, I tried watching a video of his, but his room that he streams out of is a total mess. He seems like a gamer. He seems really unstable. Plus, he's from Pittsburgh, so I just ugh. So, I have no interest in hearing his theories, but apparently his theories were, according to what I've heard from other people, his theories were that it's through aerosols. It's through like the skyria that you see. It was through that, and that a bunch of people got, really sick, and then they were told that they had COVID through that. And I'm like, no, that's it's got to be more concentrated than that. It's got to be more controlled than that. That's just too random. You can't, you can't. so again, I we're just doubling down on this 4 years later. We are doubling down on this. Another thing that I find just fascinating with the way that the human mind tries to justify, certain circumstances or situations. It's like you can hold two thoughts regarding this situation in your brain at one time. I had one individual who absolutely just fell all over, herself, loved us, just absolutely loved us because we had said it was a financial reset. And of course it's a financial reset, but that it's going to be using, fraudulent instruments like debt and, and sort of this similar to the waste, fraud, and abuse that we saw in the 2008 collapse. It would be something like that, but on steroids. And this person, and then we also said equally that it was also a mass poisoning. And this is all, right around the time of lockdowns. This is when we first published and produced Core Tyranny. She's like, no, I'm really disappointed in you because you're still holding on to this idea that it was a poisoning when you know that it's just a financial reset. I said, no, you can have both. In fact, I would argue that you can't have a financial reset until you have just enough people to get sick to convince the rest of the population that they do need to lock down and make themselves poor, make themselves not go to work, make themselves close their business. You know what I'm saying? You can't have one without the other. They tried very hard to destroy the intellect of the American population in the 2008 financial collapse, and they did it without deploying a poison and then marketing that poison as a virus. They did it quasi successfully, but not enough. Not enough. The Bank of International Settlements, which is the central bank of all central banks, they need this financial reset. And the only way that you could deploy something of this magnitude across the globe is if you fabricate and market the idea that there is a novel pathogen or that there is some kind of virus, and to make us all just kind of change the way we operate in the world. And it worked. It totally worked. So during the lockdown, during the time when people were inside, I learned something recently from a woman. I'll share her Twitter page with you. And this is what kills me about one of the things that I've learned over the last 4 years is that the things that I said from the very beginning are now being normalized and accepted by your favorite doctors, by your favorite scientists. And okay, so this is one person who I really enjoy. His name is Housatonic Live, and he actually interviewed this woman whose Twitter page I'm going to share with you now. So let me get rid of him, and then let me share her page. She has become a really interesting voice in all of this. Her name is Jessica. She lives in Chicago. Let me tell you something. When this whole thing started, she was pretty loud about, things that were a little bit too scientific for my taste. And I think she even admits to supporting the original narrative, which is that we all need to stay inside and we all need to mask up and stuff. And she's in Chicago. But then all of a sudden, not long after I started following her, she disappeared. And I couldn't find her because I remember she had a really cool handle on Twitter. It's called Woodhouse. And I thought, man, that's kind of cool because, I'm a big Jane Austen fan. And, one of her characters is Emma Woodhouse. Now, maybe it's a different Woodhouse that disappeared. I don't know. But at any rate, she's back. And she is in this video that I'm going to share where she was brought onto this guy's channel. She says some of the exact same things I say. In fact, she will say things like, I am looking at this from the perspective of like historical, from a historical perspective, or I'm looking at these things where I'm collecting all this data and I'm sort of archiving history. Now, for those of you who stuck with us for the last 4 years, how did I used to begin every single one of my broadcasts? I used to begin it. This is Book of Hours. We are here to archive history in the age of COVID. Remember, I used to use that in almost every broadcast. Well, she mentions that she mentions that that's how she thinks of herself in this video, that she's like, oh, I'm just here to, historically archive what's going on. Something like that. But you notice she's got, 53,000 followers. I have 1,800. So, something is not right. If you can't, and this is one thing that we've learned over the last 4 years, we are being assassinated. We are not just being censored. We are not just being squelched. The algorithms aren't just, not working in our favor. We are literally being assassinated off social media. For whatever reason, we cannot be heard. But other people who are saying the exact same things that we said exactly 4 years ago have 53,000 followers. So I think I have a right to be a little bit frustrated with that, but I know it's not their fault. It's not our fault. Well, it is our fault because we said it from the very beginning that a poison was deployed, marketed as a vaccine. It was just enough to get people to follow the national emergency protocols, which was to lock down, wear a mask, and then eventually get a shot. So what I would like to do now is I'll go ahead and take her off screen, and then I am going to share a portion of this 2-hour long conversation that she had with Mark, who goes by Housatonic Live, and a person that I've recently started following. So let me do that. Okay, so this is their conversation. Her name is Jessica Hockett, Woodhouse76 on Twitter. And the two of them are talking about some data that she's collected around the boroughs of New York City in April of 2020, if not before. She also mentioned she mentioned just about everything in this near 2-hour discussion is her coming back to the conclusion that it was a poisoning. And even Mark has said that it may have been a fentanyl poisoning. So I'm just going to play this with no, I'm not going to really set it up for you. I just want you to listen, okay?
Here's my theory. Here's my current theory, but I could change my mind. Perhaps there was a strategic, controlled drug poisoning event. Imagine how easy that would be.
Oh, it would be very easy.
And
you can have very, very convincing repressed pills. All you need is a few locations to distribute, anti-anxiety medicines, Xanax, with fentanyl installed. Two pharmacists. You could poison several thousand people very, very easily. It doesn't need to be a lot. And I've seen these pills. I've seen the lethal pills. Well, unfortunately, I don't know personally these kids, but I do know of 2 children in Boston that died. Teenagers, not even drug addicts. They call these one and dones. You go to a party, you're being a stupid teenager. Hey, so-and-so has some Xanax pills. Oh, I heard that makes you feel this way. And, it's laced with a lethal level of fentanyl. This stuff is out there. And, oh, by the way, we did just have a drug epidemic of 500,000 deaths in 5 years. 500,000 in 5 years, 100,000 a year. Average in the year 2000 was a little over 20,000, which is the main contributor of the life expectancy drops. It started the life expectancy drop in 2019, and it's only gotten worse since then. And if that inquisition would lead to a different assessment of what happened in New York City and completely undermine the impetus to roll out all of the mRNA vaccines, why will nobody do it? Why won't anyone even consider the possibility? If these interventions are causing so much harm and death, why not spend a couple of days, at least rule it out?
See, everything in New York, there's the on-stage version of what's going on. Actually, there's the op and the counter-op, which are launched at the same time. Ventilators is a great example. We need ventilators. We need ventilators. Oh, wait, the ventilators aren't working.
They were shutting down the car factories to make ventilators. They were just rolling off the Ford plant ventilators.
But then right away was the counter-op. Don't you remember? Colleen Smith was yelling about ventilators. So was Cuomo. And then March 31st, Cameron Kyle Seidel puts a YouTube video out that never got taken down. And he was venerated and promoted by WebMD and the New York Times. And his I'm just sitting here in my apartment, the ventilators don't appear to be able to working.
Oh, he even had his hospital garb on.
Same up. Ventilators, in my opinion, were a cover for the drugs. Because what kills the fastest in a medical setting? Not a ventilator, it's an injection. And maybe they injected people who were already in the hospital and were on the precipice. I mean, this is dark stuff, but we don't have answers. Nobody wants to talk about it. Why was CFR placed primarily on cardiac arrest calls the same day the first COVID case was announced? What does COVID mean? Is it the name of an operation?
It's COVID. Robert Malone says COVID.
Exactly. What do these things mean? Was there, I'll go with a poisoning event. Drugs. Very, very easy to control. I dare say that some people, some agencies have some experience with this, maybe from in the past.
So I've heard. So it's been documented by
to trigger it. And maybe that's the explanation for it. There were young people showing up to the hospital not able to breathe. They were hypoxic. Were they injected? The other possibilities were homeless people picked up off the streets and injected with sedatives to calm them down in the ambulance. I mean, this again, very, very dark. Or maybe this is fabricated. Maybe this is deaths pushed from here and pushed from here into maybe their models got away from them and they actually used death to catch up with the model. So some of these things that I'm saying, I'm not representing the perspectives of other people or colleagues or whatever people that I've worked with. This is, things like that, or my speculations about what could have been going on are my own. And in a lot of cases, I keep getting more data back and looking, and I could be completely wrong.
Okay, those sound like extreme theories. They sound like extreme. How could that happen? Well, millions of people are now being told what really happened was there's an overweight virologist at the University of North Carolina that wanted to make an extra few dollars on patents. So he decided to unleash a gain-of-function virus on the planet while working with a researcher who was affectionate of bats in China and killed 15 million people. I mean, that's the current narrative, and this guy he's a really bad dude. Very, very careless. That's the narrative right now. And that's all you need to know. We will arrest him, and it's done. By the way, all cancer therapy and, matter of fact, all immunizations going forward are now gene therapy. Oh, by the way, just happens to be the one thing that the United States has more invested in, probably our entire space program, was the HIV vaccine. And even our space program was mostly studying cancers and microbes on return craft and so on and so forth. So, wow, how convenient is that? Yes, it sounds crazy. What is currently being promoted, I might add, is fantastically more obscene.
Right. But, I do want to say that these things that I'm putting out there as ideas, none of this was on my radar. None of it. So even though these things may be crazy and I may be wrong, I can honestly say that I've arrived at some of these possibilities as a result of close and inductive study of data, of contemporaneous reports, of different things. Again, that doesn't make me right, but the silence is so interesting. I consider myself, a historian basically of this event. We'll see how long.
Okay, so she considers herself a historian of the event. And that's something that, I had been saying all along for quite a few years at the beginning of this, is that, we were archiving history in the age of COVID. And yeah, that is the exact phrase that I would use. Hi, we're here to archive history in the age of COVID. So, it's nice that Jessica has finally, is one person, and I think there's probably a few other people out there that do collect all this data to prove the thing that JP and I speculated about 4 years ago, which is that it was a deployed poisoning. And since then, we've come to realize that the rise of fentanyl overdoses and the way that it has just taken over this country, in practically every corner of this country has some sort of fentanyl problem, that we realize that that's probably, or at least I realize that that's probably the more important discussion that people should be having, because there's nothing being done about it. One of the things that I mentioned at the beginning of this broadcast, after I read my piece that I wrote yesterday about Kate Middleton's disappearance, one of the things I mentioned is that you can't reset things financially unless you're in a state of emergency. So as long as there is a fentanyl crisis, then we can still be under an emergency declaration, which means that all the rules are suspended, all the laws are suspended, the way money is allocated is changed. And so that's something that we've noticed over the last 4 years. And so you have to change your way of thinking about these crises, and you have to change what money means. You have to change your attitude about money. You have to change your attitude about our economy. A lot of people are still living in 20th century attitudes, and you need to get up to speed. We are now, in 2024, we're in the 21st century. There is nothing. This is one other thing that we've learned over the last 4 years, or at least an attitude that I've adopted. There is nothing that you see on social media that is true. Not one thing. Especially if it's something that will create an emotional reaction out of you. So this could involve, wartime scenarios, things that you see happening in Gaza or Ukraine. This could involve shootings at schools. This could involve the whole gamut of whatever it is that causes you to have an emotional reaction and suspend logic. Is probably not true. And most things that you see about famous people are also not true. For instance, with the Kate Middleton story, the palace PR people, the royal PR people, are having you believe that she's, sitting at her computer playing around with, AI or with Photoshop, messing with photos. And oopsie, sometimes I like to play with Photoshop. Like she's the one that tweeted out that message. No, she's dead. They killed her. I'm not sure she even made it to her 42nd birthday, which was January 9th. So the more that they tell you that she's alive, and the more that they tell you that she's messing around on Photoshop, or that she's in cars with Prince William going to private meetings or something like that, that's all false. Everything about, anything that you read about famous people is typically false. I think she's dead. That's my opinion. So, and one of the things too that Jessica mentions to Mark in that conversation, in a bit of that conversation that I just played, and again, it's a 2-hour conversation, so you can go back and listen to it yourself, is that, this is really dark stuff. And so this is, if you look at her background, she's sitting in front of like a big bookshelf. I'm pretty sure that actually is either her house or her study. Most of the people that are covering the COVID operation come from privilege, and they have big studies like she has, or they have, income sources where, this whole COVID thing never even interrupted their income source. And that's another thing we've learned over the last 4 years, is how shocked they are, how shocked all of these people are who've become so popular on your feeds, how utterly shocked they are, and just totally taken aback that there's meanie heads at the Department of Defense or in your government or working at the HHS, Yes, people are mean that work in these positions of power, and they will kill you. She talked about, in another section of that same conversation, she reminded the viewers about the National Guard going in and having to pick up dead bodies because there was such a shortage of coroners or something like that, and that we had to deploy the National Guard. I mean, this is ridiculous, right? I mean, the National Guard in 2020 rolling down your street, ringing the bell saying, "Bring out your dead." Come on. Like, this is what we were supposed to believe. One thing that she did say, though, that is something that I hadn't thought of, were the amount of 911 calls. So she did a particular study in her hometown, which is Chicago, and then she compared it to New York. And she noticed that in the 5 boroughs of New York in 2020, there was an increase in 911 calls, and they were heart-related 911 calls. So it was people that were having a specific kind of heart event, and they were dying. In fact, there was such a rise of dead on arrivals that no protocol was even administered to try to bring these people back to life. They were gone. They were dead on arrival. So she has a sister who is a doctor. So she was reading through the reports of these types of heart attacks that these people were having at home. And I believe this was during lockdown. This is before the shot, of course. This was still in 2020. So she asked her sister, I noticed that in the reports, there's this specific word or this specific type of heart attack that is mentioned, and that these now dead patients were diagnosed with this specific type of heart attack. I forget the name of it. And the sister said, oh, well, that's the kind of heart attack that you would get if you were shocked, via electricity and your heart stops. And Jessica was like, well, what about drugs? And she's like, oh, cocaine. Just no hesitation. So people were calling 911 in the middle of these very unique types of heart attacks. And when the paramedics would arrive, they would see that it was a type of heart attack that you would only get if you did like a cocaine overdose. So did we suddenly see a rise of cocaine use in these particular boroughs of New York? Possibly. If people were locked down and bored and depressed, maybe their drug use went up. I don't know. But it stands to reason that in this concentrated area, a certain percentage of those people were probably going and getting their flu shots. And it was probably done in 2019. But this type of heart attack comes really fast. So she went back to 2019 and she surveyed the data from 2019 through 2020. And sure enough, it was those types of heart attacks. So, I mean, for someone like her who has the means and the time and, the type of talent to pore over data like this, that's great. It supports our theory from the very beginning that it was a deployed poisoning, probably in the flu shots. And another thing that we learned over the last 4 years is, once again, this whole entire story, this whole entire operation seems to take the more privileged people in society, the people with money, the people that never really had to, work for anything in life, the people that were handed their educations and handed, their jobs basically, and never really had to try hard. If that demographic is on the right side of history, they still have to this day a sense of shock and a sense of disbelief that people in positions of power would want to kill them. And one thing I'd like to refer you to again, and I know I keep talking about this, is the Kate Middleton story. There is no doubt in my mind that she was taken out. They took out a princess. What makes you think they won't take you out? Maybe all of these people who are on the right side of history and gathering the data, who've never ever had financial problems in their life, have never had physical problems in their life, they've never ever really suffered. Maybe they just need to get over themselves and realize that they're not that special anymore. These are the kind of people that, they would draw garbage on a piece of paper when they were 3 years old, and their mother would say it was like, the best thing that they had ever created, and she'd like showcase it on the refrigerator and show it to all the friends. Like, these people grew up like feeling very special, like they were something special, and that they were immune to anything bad happening to them. Well, that's no longer. And I think what's happening is, in the age of COVID, where we have these types of people sharing, the data and sharing the facts and sharing their knowledge about the way the world works, we also have them, kind of like, oh God, this could happen to me too. Yeah, it could. You're not that special. So that's something that's never ever talked about. But it's something that I've noticed as I watch. I am now more of a lurker on Twitter or on social media in general. I'm watching the collective sort of behavior of all these people that have come out over the last 4 years. I'm watching their behavior and the way that they're responding and reacting to this information. They are realizing that they are not immune. No longer are they the special, person that their parents always told them they were. They've got to grow up sometime. So, and I also noticed too that different regions are responding in different ways. When we were living in the ghetto in Pittsburgh for 5 years, we were there during the worst of the COVID operation. We were there during lockdown. We were there during masking. We were there during the deployment of the vaccine, or the COVID-19 vaccine. And we noticed every day, multiple times a day, people were sharing on their social media pages about sudden deaths. And this was happening before the sudden death craze even was a thing. Died suddenly didn't even exist on social media. Now they have a huge Facebook following. They have a huge Twitter following. They're probably all over TikTok too. The branded died suddenly accounts, right? Well, we were noticing died suddenly long before anybody else was, because we lived in a poor neighborhood and we saw it firsthand. We experienced things like, over the last 4 years, another term that, that was starting to develop into our consciousness, in society, was transmission. We experienced transmission firsthand. I experienced it. JP experienced it. Even down to falling flat on his face, like those videos you see of those people that would just fall over like trees. They wouldn't even put their arms out to break the fall. They just, boom, flat on the ground. That happened to JP just from being around someone who had recently taken the COVID-19 vaccine. For me, it started in my throat, and it felt like I had swallowed poison. And I kept getting, and this is going to sound really gross and going to sound really, really strange to some people, but while it was happening, I kept recalling to mind a story I had heard about a teenage girl who was taken from a 7-Eleven, thrown into the back of a car, and within 1 hour, and had been brutally raped and attacked by groups of men. She actually made it out okay. Her brother actually saved her. Quick thinking, he saved her. But in the few short minutes that she was with these men, she was brutally raped orally. And when they took her to the emergency room, her whole entire throat and chest area was covered with gonorrhea. And that's how it felt to me after I had spent an hour in the pool surrounded by a dozen women who were congratulating themselves after just getting the COVID shot. They went to the clinic to go get the COVID shot. They still had the Band-Aids they were proudly displaying on their arms. Then they came to pool class. And I unknowingly, when I heard them congratulating themselves and when I heard them talking about it and how excited they were that they got it, my instinct says, leave now, leave now, go. But I didn't listen to my instincts because I love being in the water and I just wanted to be in my water therapy class. And so I went into the aerobics class, the water aerobics class, and within less than 6 hours, my throat was covered with a toxin. And then it settled in my chest. And the only thing that helped me was arnica tea. And arnica tea helps bodies, or arnica in general is arnica montana. I'll be like Naomi Wolf right now. I'm not a doctor. Don't arrest me. I'm not giving advice or anything. I'm just telling you what worked for me anecdotally. And once I drank the arnica tea, it went away. And I as quick as it happened to me, the bad thing happened is as quickly as it was turned around after I drank a couple of cups of arnica tea, because what arnica does is it goes after trauma. If you've got bruising, if your body is experiencing some kind of trauma, it will, it basically puts your body in a place of where it heals itself. So that's what I did. So the last 4 years have been such an eye opener, and coming to the Gulf Coast now, in the last 4 years, we moved across country and we left Pittsburgh and moved across country. And now that we're in the Gulf Coast and things are much more relaxed and people aren't so tuned into like what's going on in the media, they kind of it feels like they kind of take whatever their doctors tell them with a grain of salt. Very, very few sick people here. I hardly ever see anybody with a cough. We went to a play on Sunday and it was sold out and there was one person coughing throughout the play. And I remember thinking, wow, it's so weird. I haven't heard a person cough in a long, long time. So it was weird to hear them cough. So we've learned over time how to change our behavior. We know that before we go to a public event that we need to load up on liposomal vitamin C. We need to take EDTA. These are all things that we do for ourselves to help combat the transmission that's coming from the inoculated. Now, there's not many. I believe, I'm just going to believe without any real proof that the people here on the Gulf Coast are less inoculated than they are in Pittsburgh. I felt like I had more toxic reactions in general in Pittsburgh. And I think, and it could have been a multitude of factors. It's bad water. We were living in the ghetto, so it was, bad environment. So I still practice those certain protocols before I know I'm going to be around like a large group of people or I'm going to be in a crowd. I still will do, I take vitamin D3 with K and all that stuff. So I do things to counteract whatever transmission could possibly be out there. And you know what? It's not like any of these things are going to hurt. They can only help, right? In my opinion. So the fact that, so you can't go around 4 years after the national emergency was declared, you can't go around and say we need to get back to what we were before the national emergency was declared. You can't put the genie back in the bottle. You've got to assimilate to modern times. If you don't want to be in a city where there is lots of surveillance, and lots of sustainable development models being rolled out, and you're upset by the fact that your city or your town or your environment might be losing its unique cultural thumbprint or fingerprint on the planet, then leave it and go find another culture. I mean, we had to twice. We had to do it twice in 5 years. We had to leave San Francisco, and then we had to leave Pittsburgh, because we weren't happy and we weren't being fulfilled in either place. So, through all of this, you still need to pay attention to yourself. You still need to pay attention to your basic needs. I think that through the last 4 years, a lot of people have forgotten about their basic needs. And so I'm hoping that this is the turning point. Of course, there is this ridiculous election around the corner. There are no good guys in this election. And that's going to be a cause for people to, again, ramp up the anxiety, not take care of themselves, not pay attention to their bodies and minds, not get enough sleep. I mean, that's what elections do, right? And I find it unfortunate. So, I have learned a lot of things over the last 4 years, and coming back to this idea that there is a demographic of individuals that are, on the right side of history. They've never really had to worry about anything. They've never really had to work. They've pretty much been handed their privilege. I think they might start to feel less important, less self-important. But one thing about that demographic, the ones who were, I guess, on the wrong side of history, was we discovered over the last 4 years that those individuals who were gainfully employed during COVID worked for bigger corporations. They had good pay. They also had really good benefits. And so they were signing into benefits programs with their companies, and their companies were saying, should you ever become ill, this insurance company will pay out, a short-term or a long-term disability benefit to you in case you can't work. And here's some death benefits too thrown in there. So one thing that we learned, and we made a couple of videos about this as well, is that there's an entire demographic of people that after the COVID-19 vaccine was rolled out, that suddenly, out of nowhere, for the first time in history, had to draw on these benefits. And so this is what really threw insurance companies for a loop, as they were like, whoa, we've never paid this many death benefits out for healthy 35-year-olds. What is going on, right? So we did, a couple of videos about that. I think it's called The Reason. And that's one thing that we learned in between the national emergency of 2020 and today. And so that's an important that's an important statistic. That's important information. If somebody could reach those gainfully employed people now and say, I would get away from all allopathic medicine. I would get away from paying money into insurance programs, which are basically just making money off of you, and maybe guide them more into naturopathy. Then we might not see this continued statistic in this particular demographic. But the first demographic that was, in our opinion, that was truly affected by lockdown and by masking and by not working were the people that probably are considered, poor, in this country. And we also noticed that the Black population was also adversely affected by some of the early protocols, like the lockdown and masking and things like that. So I think that we've also had some incredibly strange experiences, like the purchase of Twitter by Elon Musk, the takedown of really, really popular accounts that had like 600,000 followers. Suddenly, before Elon Musk came along, Jack Dorsey was CEO of Twitter, and under his reign of the Twitter platform, these people's Twitter accounts were just destroyed. They were just annihilated. But Elon Musk has since reinstated those Twitter accounts. So that happened in the last 4 years. And it lends this idea that, big, powerful men with lots of money are on the right side of history, which I don't believe for 1 minute. So it benefited Elon Musk financially. It benefited his new company that he had just purchased. It benefited him financially to reinstate those people. One thing that happened in the last 4 years as well, which a lot of people were celebrating, and a lot of the attorneys that were filing for this to happen and brought the case forward, and a federal judge then awarded them what they wanted, which is that you no longer have to wear a mask in airports or on airplanes, unless you want to. And so people are saying, that this federal judge must have been on the right side of history. He understood, constitutional rights and this and that and the other. Not really. We come from, JP and I, we come from this position of the simplest answer is usually the right one. And given the fact that I've had to take a lot of flights over the last few months to go back and deal with a continuing periodontic and orthodontic and general dentist issue back to Pittsburgh. It's a long, complicated story, but I don't want to find a new team of doctors. I actually like those team of dentists that are working with me, and I don't want to start over. I've already put thousands of dollars into this procedure, and I would have to start over, and it would be a waste of money. So I'm just, buying the cheap plane tickets and flying back. But one thing I've noticed is that no matter how short the line is at TSA, they want you to be efficient, and they want you to be fast and efficient. And one of the things that is not fast and efficient is having to fumble to take off your mask, because most TSA operations now scan your face so that it would match your passport or your driver's license. And so they need that identity to correspond with, whatever you're handing them. And so people were taking off their masks while they were going through TSA. So in my opinion, the federal judge who made the ruling that you can no longer require American citizens to wear a mask at airports or in airplanes was not because he's on the right side of history, but because the operations that have taken place for so long, at airports were slowing down dramatically. And it was really frustrating the people that work in those positions. And so look, this whole mask thing is a real interruption to efficiency and speed. Like, we want these travelers to get through TSA quickly. We have long lines. This is ridiculous, having to have people futz with their mask and take it off and put it back on again. It's ridiculous. So I have a feeling that the pressure from the industry is what helped the mask mandate go away in airports. And so that was one thing that no one talked about. Not one person on the right side of history talked about the practicality or the impracticality of masks on faces in airports and on airlines, in airplanes. No one talked about the impracticality of it and how most likely the judge was supported by, or the judge came to his decision based on a practical comment from the industry itself. Because from where I'm sitting, I don't see one judge on the right side of history holding up the Constitution or even holding up human rights. This is evidenced by the story. You notice I'm emphasizing the word story of something else that's happened in the last 4 years, which is the January 6th, 2021 alleged insurrectionists. We are being told, the story goes, that they are still held without trial or due process in jail, without really even being charged for anything, which is way unconstitutional. So if we had federal judges that withheld the Constitution, then this story of them, you notice I'm saying story, this story of them wouldn't even be a story. So they had the story out there to let you know that the Constitution go bye-bye. So, and so this is another thing that JP and I have learned over the last 4 years. And it's something that I said before in this broadcast, and I'll say it again, is that we are being fed narrative, and most likely, I can almost guarantee that that narrative is not true. It's not true. I'm not sure I believe that there are American citizens held without due process. But the fact is they want you to believe that, because that's where we are legally. So whether it's true or not isn't really the point. The point is that they're sharing the story to make you understand and signal to you that there is no due process anymore. This is evidenced by the fact that, not one attorney general has filed a lawsuit against the state health representatives who mandated or initiated these protocols, which were just anti-human, anti-life, anti-constitutional, to say the least. Not one attorney general has come forward and done that. So we have a problem here. And also something that, Jessica said to Mark in that video clip that I played earlier, which is that the information about the poisoning, the deployment of a poisoning, that narrative and that commentary is crickets. No one is talking about that. No one on the alleged right side of history. People are still referring to it as, either a virus, or worse yet, when we 4 years ago said, yes, there were people that got sick, they weren't sick with a virus, they were sick with a poisoning, probably from their 2019 flu shot. That maybe had, extra poison in it, because these people are acting as if they've been poisoned. They don't have a common cold. We were, attacked and blasted by former patrons and even people who claim to like us, by saying, no, that whole story about people dying of COVID, whether it was COVID or a poisoning, or whether that's all false. No one died. We actually had people tell us that, and I was just appalled. People were very, very sick. People were made sicker once they went into the hospital. We have a former neighbor in Pittsburgh who we ran into at the grocery store. And we asked her how she was doing. And she broke down and started sobbing, and she clung to me and held on to me as if I was like some sort of lifeboat or life preserver. She told us that her daughter had a cough and it wouldn't go away. It was a persistent cough. This is early COVID, early 2020, when the marketing campaign called COVID was deployed on us. And through sobbing and tears and not able to control herself, she told us about her her daughter who had a persistent cough and went to the emergency room. They ran enough COVID tests on her until she became positive, and then whisked her away, took her cell phone, whisked her away, starved her, would not give her water, probably pumped her with remdesivir, intubated her, and kept her in this, what my friend and what my former neighbor described when they finally let her go see her own daughter who was dying. She described it as if it was something out of a movie. Her words. Every single person, every nurse, every attendant was covered from head to toe. You couldn't see their faces in these sort of hazmat suits. Kind of think of like a beekeeper suit where you can't see the face, with these big plastic visors covering their face. There were heavy plastic curtains around each patient room. It was deathly silent, and it was so creepy. She described what must have been the most creepy, frightening, horrible experience that she has ever experienced. And then her daughter died. That's how her daughter died. So her daughter, who went in for a persistent cough that wouldn't go away, was killed by the hospital. We have a friend in Pittsburgh who has a friend, and that friend rescued his father. His father was in the exact same situation that our friend's daughter was in, except that our friend's father, our friend's friend, who was the son of the father who they were holding in this type of hospital scenario, he basically threw a fit and raised a huge stink and rescued his father from the hospital. But what he said was, and this is something else we've come to learn over the last 4 years, is that the hospitals were acting like death camps. I don't know if they are now. I think maybe things are kind of back to normal a little bit. But what my friend's friend described when he went in to go rescue his father was that all these patients were intubated, unconscious, and they had their arms tied above their head at the wrists. It was like Jesus on the cross, the sacrifice, right? So I think this is why a lot of people over the last 4 years have decided to, attach some sort of spiritual meaning to this military operation, is because of the way that, the way my friend was describing what her friend saw when he went in to go rescue the father, is that all these people were in this, like when Jesus was sacrificed on the cross, they had their arms bound above their heads, and they were unconscious. So, I could see why people would go there when this kind of thing is happening. But ultimately, it's a military operation. Ultimately, a poison was deployed on the public, and it was very organized. It was probably done through flu shots where they could track where certain vials went or certain cases went. It seems like most of those 2019 flu shots that many people in my former community in Pittsburgh were taking were concentrated in poor areas. Then you had the rollout of the vaccine, and they could concentrate which vaccines were placebos and which vaccines were saline and which vaccines were not. And so, a couple of people that came into the narrative over the last 4 years were Sasha Latypova and Catherine Watt. And of course, I did that video essay in January of last year, I think it was, January 2023. January 1st, 2023 is when it was launched on our YouTube channel. It's got about 30,000 views. And one of the things that we learned from them, especially from Sasha, is that, you know, she's brought a whole bunch of information to the table. But my one takeaway from her is that because it was a Department of Defense deployment, you know, these vaccines, because these COVID vaccines were a Department of Defense deployment, they didn't have to share what was in them. They didn't have to share the ingredients of them. And so for the first time in the history of my life, you know, it's like, what? You know, they show you what's in your face cream. They show you what's in your, you know, in your food, you know, the ingredients are right there. And yet, because this was a Department of Defense deployment of these so-called health vaccines, we weren't allowed to see what was in them. It's unheard of. And so that's another thing that's come about in the last 4 years, is this deep distrust of pharmaceuticals now. And we've seen people turning away from pharmaceuticals as a result of that. And one thing she said was, you know, it could be anything in these vaccines, in these vials, in some of them that they're deploying. It could be toilet water, you know, it's garbage, you know. And the way that they were deploying vaccines, or the way that they were deploying PCR tests on the public, was absolutely comical. It was something out of a cartoon. You know, you drive up to Starbucks and get your latte and a PCR test. Seriously, this is clown world. You know, so that's another thing that we learned, is that they actually went there. They actually went to clown world, and we let them. You know, we didn't say, no, I am not taking a health test to swab for a thing that doesn't make any sense, okay, at McDonald's or at the taco stand. I'm not doing that. You know what I'm saying? So there was this level of absurdity over the last 4 years. That's another takeaway, okay? Again, this is a broadcast about what we've experienced over the last 4 years. And right now, what comes to mind is how normal the absurd became. It became the theater of the absurd. People going and getting their nasals swabbed in their cars and doing it willfully. They weren't even doing it at the butt of a gun. They weren't told that they had to, but they did it willingly. That's only allowing the absurdity to become normalized. And so once you open up that door, once you open up that absurdity, then you can't close it again. Like, you have to be prepared for the fact that there will be more absurdity. And we saw absurdity in other areas through the elections, through the ridiculousness of a pre-recorded alleged attack on the Capitol. Okay, this was all pre-recorded. This thing with the guy and the buffalo head and all that stuff, I don't know. But that was pre-recorded and then launched out into the public as if it was live or real. Once you allow this absurdity to get into your consciousness and open yourself up to this idea that there could be an element of truth to the absurd, you've lost the plot. I'm telling you. So you know, it's just been very difficult living in both worlds. You know, I feel like we live in a few different worlds. We have a world of people that are on the right side of history that don't believe the absurd, but then they believe the absurdity of other things. You know, they can't take the information, the false information that they know about the COVID operation, and then apply it to other operations that create an emotional response from them. They're incapable of doing that. So that's frustrating. And even my Kate Middleton article, an individual that believes that ritualistic spirit cooking and, babies being eaten and adrenochrome and all that crazy stuff that is just ridiculous, believes that, but then read my article, which was incredibly salient, or my blog piece, which was salient about, how even down to the very last day of her public existence or her public appearance, Kate Middleton was wearing Diana's sapphire earrings. And all along, she had been set up for us commoners to believe that she was trying to be the next Diana, when I don't even think she was. I think that is a narrative that they created. Did she even know that all these dresses and outfits that they were putting on her for all of her public appearances over the last however many years she's been married, like a decade or so, as a royal, that they were the exact same dresses that Diana wore, so that they could then show a picture of Diana and a picture of her side by side and say, see, she's trying to be Diana. Of course, that endears her to the public, but maybe the palace or the royals wanted to, set her up somehow, like she was trying to take over this. It's like that person who believes in baby eating Luciferianism doesn't look at what I just explained as a possibility for why we're not seeing her. It's people will go to the extreme. And we've always been on this channel, we've always been the ones to say the simplest answer. And the most benign, boring answer is usually the correct one. Or as Jessica said with Mark in that little clip that I showed you, it's dark. Or it's a dark answer. Yes, Jessica. They did collect dead bodies in order to justify something, Yes, they did drug a bunch of innocent people and killed them. Yes, they did. It's very dark. And we were the only ones, and we had been the only ones to just come out and describe it. This is narcissism. This is psychopathy. This is, we've seen a rise of this to levels we've never, ever seen before. We've seen a rise of it in the last 4 years. So it's hard for people to even imagine how dark it really is. And instead of applying it to sort of this benignness that comes with this dark energy, they apply it towards spirit cooking or other really silly stuff that doesn't have anything to do with what's going on. If you have ever worked in a corporate environment, if you ever, had multiple bosses above you and you had to, there's something about corporations that create psychopathy, create narcissism. And it's very cold and it's very beige and it's very benign. And that's what we're going with. That's what they're going with in this continued operation. So, I just wanted to take this time today on the 4th anniversary of the national emergency to sort of go over some of the things we have witnessed and what we've allowed to be normalized and what we have inadvertently convinced ourselves of over the last 4 years. Just there's still some cognitive dissonance going on. You believe in one thing, but you don't believe in another thing. So even though they're using the same tactics to deploy the thing. I don't think it's all that complicated. Yes, it is a financial reset. I will end this broadcast by reminding you about something that a very deeply embedded asset of the CIA, told us about, many, many years ago. She wrote a giant book called Surveillance Capitalism. Her name is Shoshana Zuboff. You've probably heard of her. Total CIA asset, comes out of Harvard. But she wrote this tell-all book about how the way money works and how the way our economy works is coming to an end. We are no longer operating sort of on this supply-demand type of economy. Human beings are now the thing that gives the economy justification to even exist. And it's what we produce. It's our thoughts. It used to be that the economy was based on the value of labor. Well, labor is becoming irrelevant because we're being taken over by robotics and AI. All the money, at least, is being put into, we're not being taken over by robotics and AI. I shouldn't phrase it that way. The money is being invested into robotics and AI. Okay. So while we are simultaneously being made irrelevant on this planet, and hey, if they're going to take out a princess, they'll take out you, right? So while we are simultaneously being made irrelevant, we are also being killed off, right? So there's all these things happening. When you have this big shift in the way the economy is valued, or the financialization of our world is positioned, like how we make it go, you go through an existential crisis. And so I think what's happening now at the tail end of this 4 years is, I think we're going to start to realize, or we're going to start to see more people go through this existential crisis. And I have to say, Jessica Hockett, who goes by Woodhouse 76, who went from, yes, we need to lock down, and yes, we need to wear a mask, but I don't think that this virus is as dangerous as what they're claiming, she went from that to, oh my God, they poisoned people and no one's been arrested. And this is poisoned people like 2020 poisoned people, not 2021 or 2022 with the COVID vaccines. That's a different poisoning. They poisoned people and then made people believe it was a virus. So she's going through her own existential crisis right now. I mean, so I think we all need to try to keep our feet firmly planted on the ground and stay in reality, because what's going on outside your front door is what's real versus a lot of what you see on social media. But always keep it in the back of your mind what they're capable of because of what they've already done. They made the absurd normal. They deployed poisons and told you it was a cold or a very bad cold. They deployed more poisons on you to, tell you that you needed to do this to fix the cold, right? They made you incarcerate yourself, put a mask on your child, and all of the shenanigans in between. Keep all of that sort of in the back of your mind, but don't live your life by it. Try to live as much as you can in the real world. There's enough going on in the real world that is good and also equally tragic, and people will need you. People will need you for your goodness, and they will need you to support them during their, during their tragedies and during their trauma, right? So I want to thank you for joining today. I really appreciate your support, and I'm very glad that, I still have some of these platforms with a few followers that will listen to what I have to say and, and really just embrace it. Yeah, so I will be going live at 10 o'clock on Friday for the continuation of the reading of The Great Taking. All right, so I will speak to you then. Bye-bye.